Day 548. I stopped counting by scratches on a wall that felt like something out of a movie, and I'd spent 18 months trying to stay clear-eyed about the difference between what this was and what it felt like. What it was: a county jail cell in Nashville, Tennessee. A bed 6 inches too short, a ceiling the color of old chalk. What it felt like: someone else's life, borrowed without consent. Tomorrow morning, I would walk out of this building. And when I did, the people who put me here were going to learn something about patience. My name is Dinah Merritt. For 31 years, I ran Merritt Care, 3 licensed senior living facilities in the Nashville area, built from a converted Victorian house on Charlotte Avenue that my late husband Felix and I mortgaged ourselves to the limit to open. 11 beds in 1993, 212 staff members by the time my son had me arrested. My son, the boy I raised, the man I brought into my own company and trusted with 30 years of my work. His wife Farah put the idea in motion. He let her, and they both forgot about Marin. The trouble started the way it usually does, with numbers that didn't match. I did my own quarterly reviews. Felix had drilled that into me from the beginning. No one watches your money the way you watch your own money, not even the people you pay to do it. That habit saved me once in 2007 when a vendor had been double billing for 2 years. And it saved me, eventually, in the fall before everything fell apart. $380,000. 14 months of payments to a company called Crestline Consulting. I had never signed a contract with Crestline Consulting. The address was a mailbox service on Nolansville Pike. When I pulled the business registration, the listed owner was Farah Tillman Merritt, my daughter-in-law. I sat at my desk at our Belmont Boulevard administrative office for a long time before I did anything else. I'd never liked Farah. I'm not going to dress that up. She married Jasper 4 years before the money started disappearing, and from the first Christmas she came to dinner, I had felt something I didn't name at the time but understood now. The way she looked at the facilities, at the Charlotte Avenue house with its wide porch and its carefully tended garden, at the Brentwood campus with its newer construction and its rehabilitation wing. It wasn't the look of someone falling in love with the work. It was inventory. Jasper was my COO. I'd brought him in when he was 38, carefully, with a plan that I'd laid out to him explicitly. 5 years alongside me, then a transition when I felt he was ready. He was smart enough, motivated enough, but there had always been a restlessness in him I couldn't fully reach. He had Felix's eyes and his impatience, and none of Felix's ease with himself. I spent 2 weeks going further back before I said a word. When I finished, the total was closer to $600,000. Small transfers, layered through legitimate invoices. Exactly the kind of thing you'd only find if you were already looking. I did not call Jasper's phone. I did not send an email. I called his direct line from the office system on a Tuesday morning and told him I needed him in my office at 10. I didn't tell him why. When he came in, I slid the folder across the desk and waited. I watched his face carefully. The recognition came faster than I expected, and underneath it, briefly, something else. Not shame exactly. Calculation. He said it was a misunderstanding. I said I wanted every dollar returned by Friday, and that after that we'd decide together whether this stayed between us or went elsewhere. I told him I was his mother, not his adversary, but I was not going to let him steal from 200 elderly people whose care depended on those funds. He left without raising his voice. 4 days later, there was a fire at my Brentwood facility. The maintenance corridor on the 2nd floor. The sprinklers controlled it within 20 minutes, but not before it reached the adjacent hallway. One resident, Mr. Fitch, 87 years old, a retired schoolteacher with a heart condition documented in his file, did not survive the night. He was transferred to Vanderbilt Medical Center and passed away at 11:40 p.m. I was in the parking lot of that facility within 40 minutes of the alarm, watching smoke seep from the upper story windows, and something broke open in me that I have not been able to fully close since. The fire investigator came 2 days later. He was careful with his language. He said there were anomalies in the burn pattern at the electrical panel, suggesting the fire might not have originated accidentally. Jasper arrived the following morning with Farah and a man I'd never seen who turned out to be their attorney. In the parking lot, quietly, out of earshot of my staff, Jasper told me he was filing for emergency conservatorship. He had an affidavit from a physician, one I had never met, stating that I showed signs of cognitive decline and decision-making impairment under professional stress. He said he was doing it for my protection. He said it in a voice full of sorrow that I do not believe he felt. The conservatorship froze my access to my own accounts before I could retain private counsel. I had a public defender, a good man, overworked and under-resourced, who told me honestly that the state's case was strong and that a plea would limit my exposure. I refused to plead guilty to something I did not do. The trial lasted 4 days. Jasper testified that I had been increasingly erratic in the weeks before the fire, that I had been fixated on a financial dispute with him, that the fire investigator's findings were consistent with years of deferred maintenance that he, as my concerned COO, had repeatedly flagged to me. The implication was clear: a volatile, aging woman cutting corners, losing her grip on the business she'd built, causing a tragedy through her own negligence. Farah sat in the front row every day. She brought a small photograph in a frame and held it in her lap during testimony. Mr. Fitch, taken at our facility's holiday party. I didn't find out until later that she had requested that photograph from our own files 2 weeks before the trial began. I was convicted of negligent homicide, 18 months in Davidson County Jail. The first thing my cellmate Bertie told me when I arrived was that I needed to stop looking like I was waiting for someone to apologize. "Nobody's coming to apologize," she said. "Faster you know that, faster you figure out what comes next." Bertie was 64, a former bookkeeper, serving 2 years for embezzlement from a trucking company in Murfreesboro. She was the most practically useful person I encountered in 18 months. Within 2 weeks, she had shown me which of the prison library's legal databases were actually current, which resource books were worth reading, and how to file for extended library access under the educational provision for inmates pursuing legal self-study. She also walked me through double-entry bookkeeping methods, commonly used to conceal corporate theft, which she understood from both sides of the problem. I filled 3 composition notebooks in that library. I studied elder care law, corporate fraud, forensic accounting, fire investigation methodology, and the legal distinction between criminal negligence and civil liability. I read each notebook cover to cover at least twice. And every 3rd Thursday of the month, I waited for Marin. Marin was 32, the daughter of my late sister Selma, who had died of cancer 6 years before. Marin had grown up in and out of my house, a quiet and careful girl who became a quiet and careful woman. When Jasper brought her on as an administrative coordinator at Charlotte Avenue 2 years before my arrest, I had been glad. She knew how things should run. She paid attention to details most people let slide. Her first visit, she was formal, measured, warm in the careful way of someone who has been coached. She brought documents Jasper wanted reviewed. She explained each one in a neutral voice. She was a convincing actor. Halfway through that first visit, while I was looking down at a transfer authorization form, I felt her finger move across the surface of the table between us, slowly, 1 letter at a time. SEE. I kept reading the document. I did not look up. I did not change my expression. But inside, something that had been very cold suddenly wasn't. The next month, she brought quarterly reports and spoke to me in careful formal sentences, and when I decoded the first letter of each one in my bunk that evening, the message read, "Attorney, retained." After that, I slept. Not well, you don't sleep well in that place, but deeply enough. Something had settled. The messages came in fragments across months. The attorney was Quentin Marsh, a wrongful conviction specialist based in Nashville, with a caseload of cases no one else would touch. A night shift aide at my Brentwood facility had come forward to say she'd seen a man she didn't recognize near the maintenance corridor the evening before the fire. Every financial transaction Farah had routed through Crestline Consulting, and 2 additional shell companies had been photographed and documented by Marin over 18 months of quiet, careful work. And then, across 4 visits through the winter, Marin told me what the state medical examiner had found. Mr. Fitch had died of cardiac arrest. His heart, which had been failing for months and was documented as such in his file, had simply stopped. The autopsy showed trace smoke inhalation, inconsistent with the duration of the fire in his wing. Inconsistent, in fact, with being alive during the fire at all. He had not died from my negligence during a fire. He had died of a heart attack. The fire had been set afterward. There was a man who had been paid to start it. The payment ran through a 3rd shell company to a prepaid account. And, from there, through a routing that Quentin's forensic accountant spent 4 months tracing, to a personal account connected to Farah. Jasper had known. When he stood in that parking lot and told me, in his careful, sorrowful voice, that he was filing for conservatorship to protect me, he had already known that his wife had arranged for someone to set a fire in my building. He had looked me in the eye. I lay on my bunk, and I thought about that for a long time. 3 months before my release, Jasper came back to the visitation room. He looked rested, better than he had the first time, the slight tension I'd noticed before smoothed out, replaced by the ease of a man whose situation is going the way he planned. He needed my biometric authorization for a banking transaction involving my East Nashville campus. $1.2 million in a trust restructuring process. He said it was for the long-term stability of the business. I told him no. He said I had no meaningful ability to refuse, that the conservatorship gave him authority in most circumstances, that my access to resources was limited, and that he thought I should be realistic. He said it without malice, factually, which was somehow worse than if he had been cruel about it. After he left, I sat at the table until a guard told me time was up. I walked back to the block and sat on my bunk, and I thought about everything I had left. Not what I'd lost. I already knew that list by heart. What I had. Marin on the outside, 18 months of work, and Quentin Marsh with 3 years of documents in a file. That was enough. It had always been enough. On my last night, Bertie asked if I was nervous. No, I said, and I meant it. Nervous means uncertain. I wasn't uncertain about a single thing. She asked what I was going to do first when I got out. Stand outside for 60 seconds and not be anywhere I have to be, I said. She laughed. It was a real laugh, and I was glad I'd gotten it out of her. They processed me out at 9:15 in the morning. My belongings came back in a plastic bag. My watch, my reading glasses, my wallet, Felix's wedding ring. I'd taken it off before the trial because I knew they'd take it in booking, and I hadn't wanted them to handle it. I stood at the discharge counter and put it back on, and the woman behind the desk looked at a point just past my shoulder. Outside, the September air was warm and heavy, that particular Nashville fall heaviness before the season decides to commit. I stopped on the sidewalk and put my face up for 1 moment. 60 seconds, as promised. There was a small press presence at the edge of the parking lot. Local cameras, phones extended, and in front of it all, arranged with the deliberateness of people who have rehearsed their shot, were my son and his wife. Jasper in a gray suit, Farah in a conservative blue dress, her expression composed into appropriate concern, holding a small bouquet of yellow flowers. I walked toward them and then past them. Jasper reached out and caught my arm. "Mom, come on. Just come have breakfast. We can talk about all of this. We just want you to know we're here." I stopped. I turned my head. I looked at his hand on my arm, and then at the cameras, and then at his face. "Take your hand off me," I said, "or I will tell every reporter in this parking lot what I know about Crestline Consulting." he let go. I kept walking. At the far end of the lot, a dark gray sedan was waiting. Quentin Marsh was standing beside it in a dark jacket, not performing anything, just present. When he saw me, he nodded once. "Accounts frozen," I said. "8 this morning, all 3 facilities." The conservatorship challenge was granted by Judge Pearson yesterday at 4 p.m. Jasper Merritt was formally notified at 6:30 a.m. I heard Farah's voice rising somewhere behind me. I got in the car. By the time we reached the hotel, the Tennessean story was live. The state medical examiner, who had been quietly sidelined after the original investigation and who had kept his full findings in a personal file for 18 months, had given a complete account to a journalist, documented and verifiable. Mr. Fitch had died of cardiac arrest before the fire caused him any harm. The fire had been set afterward. The fire investigator's report had been shaped to exclude this. The fire investigator had received a payment of $14,000 that, when fully traced, connected to Farah. By evening, 3 national outlets had picked it up. By the following morning, it was everywhere. I watched some of it from my hotel room. Social media had done what social media does. The contrast between my mugshot and a photograph someone unearthed of Jasper and Farah at a charity gala 3 weeks after my conviction was shared hundreds of thousands of times. Farah in an expensive gown. Jasper with his hand at the small of her back, both of them laughing at something. Jasper's personal accounts were flagged by the DA's office that afternoon. I heard from Marin that his credit cards stopped working at a downtown restaurant that evening. He'd had $160 cash in his wallet, and the bill was more than that. They received the eviction order at 4 p.m. 60 hours to vacate my house on Woodlawn Drive. A neighbor filmed them on the front steps arguing about it. The video had 300,000 views by midnight. I didn't watch it. I didn't need to. The DA filed charges 10 days after my release. Jasper cooperated fully. Every account, every shell company, every transaction, full testimony against Farah. His cooperation earned him a negotiated ceiling. 8 years, eligible for parole at 5. The fire investigator pleaded guilty separately to evidence tampering and accepting a bribe. Farah went to trial. Her defense was well-funded and creative. The prosecution had 3 years of forensic accounting, a cooperating co-defendant, a whistleblowing medical examiner, and the night shift aide who described in calm and specific terms the man she'd seen near the maintenance corridor at 11:15 p.m. the night before the fire. Farah was convicted on all counts, 14 years. Marin became CO of Merit Care the week the conservatorship was vacated. She'd been the functional operational lead for 18 months already, and everyone who worked there knew it. I gave her the title, the authority, and a salary adjustment, and she cried briefly and then told me she had a full operational report waiting on my desk. I asked for 20 minutes to drink my coffee first. She gave me exactly 20 minutes. The Second Wind program, job placement and training for women coming out of incarceration, launched the following spring in partnership with 3 Nashville workforce organizations. Bertie was in the second cohort. She is now a certified care coordinator at my Charlotte Avenue facility. She knows every resident's name, their family members, their histories. She brings a quality of attention to that work that I recognize, because I know exactly where it comes from. 8 months after my release, I drove to the correctional facility on River Road and sat down across from my son. Prison had taken the finished quality off him. The grooming, the careful calibration of every gesture. Gone. What was left was a man in his early 40s who looked like he'd stopped lying to himself and was still figuring out what to do with that. He said he wasn't going to ask me for anything. I told him I wasn't there to offer anything. I told him I needed to say one thing, and I needed him to hear it without defending himself. I told him what he'd taken from me. Not the facilities, not the 18 months, but the ordinary assurance that the person who grew up in my house and called me when Felix died and cried on the phone for 20 minutes was not my enemy. I had gone through my life assuming the people I loved were not dangerous to me. He had taken that assumption, and I needed him to understand the size of what that was. He listened. When I finished, he said, "I know. I've thought about nothing else for a long time." I asked him why he hadn't stopped it. Somewhere before the fire, before the conservatorship, there was a moment when he could have said no. Why hadn't he? He looked at the table for a moment, because I thought what she was offering was something I was owed. And I didn't want to look at what that meant about me. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years, maybe ever. I stood up. I put my hand on the plexiglass, briefly, not as warmth, but as acknowledgement of what was still there between us despite everything. The blood, the years, the particular kind of grief that belongs only to a mother making peace with what her child is capable of. He put his hand on the other side. "Don't count on anything," I said, "but don't close every door either. That's where I am right now." He nodded. He didn't push for more, which told me something. I drove back to Nashville in the afternoon, with the windows down. The city came at me in layers. The skyline first, then the neighborhoods, then the familiar corner near Charlotte Avenue, where Merit Care had started with an old house and 11 beds, and 2 people who had no idea what they were building or what it would cost them. Felix would have been 68 this year. I still talk to him sometimes, in the car, which I would never admit to anyone but Marin and Bertie. On the drive home, I told him I didn't know yet if there was anything left to rebuild between me and our son. I told him the jury was still out in every sense of the phrase, that some things take longer than 18 months to understand. But Merit Care was mine again. Marin was at the helm. Bertie was clocking in every morning. 53 women had come through second wind and were working, paying rent, raising their children. The Victorian house on Charlotte Avenue was lit up when I drove past it on the way home. I could see the warm light in the common room windows. Somewhere inside, residents who depended on us were finishing their evening meal, watching television, sleeping the particular sleep of people who know they're being cared for. That's what Felix and I built. That's what my son almost took. Almost.